guys, my name is Elizabeth Plara, and today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about patriarchy, what it is, what it means for us as a society, and what we can kind of do to move away from being a patriarchal culture. So patriarchy is essentially a society which holds up the traditional male qualities as central, while other more feminine qualities are considered subordinate. Drew Saris defines a number of qualities that really exemplify some key points of what makes up a patriarchal society. Within a patriarchy, he says there are dualistic and gendered thinking roles. So we're essentially taught to play out these gender roles from the time that we are babies. There is an air of male domination and an overall aim to protect traditional patriarchal social structures. There is also reinforcement of other types of oppression, such as the promotion of homophobia. The attributes of power, control, rationality, and extreme competitiveness are examples of these traditional male qualities that our society applauds. Being emotionally expressive, compassionate, and nurturing are examples of subordinate qualities in patriarchal systems, and thus they are looked down upon. C.J. Pascoe, in his Making Masculinity, Adolescence, Identity, and High School article, talks about when girls act in a way that would be defined as masculine, they are praised. For example, playing sports, acting tough, but when boys dress or act as girls, they are laughed at and mocked, as if being emotional and girly or anything feminine is a fate worse than death. So with the word clouds that Professor came up with in the beginning of the semester, I thought it was really, really interesting how everyone in the class, both men and women, when it came to the worst things that you can call a man, all things coined feminine were put at the top of the list. So weak, girly, sensitive, a pussy, literally the worst things that you could say to a man were all things that had to do with being feminine. So it's important to acknowledge that we are born male or female, but we are not born masculine or feminine. Sex categorization and gender accomplishment are two totally different things. By means of the push for doing gender roles, we end up engaging in a self-regulating process of trying to adhere to the social norms of what we've been taught it means to be masculine or feminine. In this way, patriarchal societies have seriously negative consequences on both men and women. A patriarchal society has at its core the promotion of male privilege. In the FAQ male privilege article, they talk about how privilege is how society accommodates you. It's about the advantages you have that you think are normal. It's about you being normal and others being the deviation from the normal. So in our society, men being the normal and then homosexuals are women being the deviation from normal. So I think this is a big part of the problem with society, this whole normality. So men don't see themselves as having privilege. It's just completely normal to them, which in part I think is why so many men and women are so turned off by feminism. They just don't see a problem with the way things are because they become so accustomed to it. So I hear a lot of women talk about how they don't need feminism because women have been granted so many rights and we have come so far as a society, and that much is definitely true. But there are many underlying ways in which women are actually oppressed that are maybe not as easy for people to see as they used to be. Male privilege is a set of privileges that are given to men as a class due to their institutional power in relation to women. While every man experiences privilege differently due to their own individual position in society, every man, by virtue of being male, benefits from this male privilege. One example of this inequality is the fact that when married, a woman is expected to take a man's name, where choosing to keep one's own name deviates from that norm. Popular culture often labels this behavior as being emasculating to a man, but never bothers to question how a woman might feel being asked to give up something that has been a part of her since birth. So I personally have experienced this in a way when I spoke about getting serious with my boyfriend, and that if we ever were to get married, I would want to keep my last name because I am Elizabeth Plara. I'm not Elizabeth so-and-so. This is who I am. This is my identity. It's who I've always been. And he was so offended. Because this is just seen as such an emasculating, non-traditional thing. So this is an example of a culture of male privilege where a man's position and feelings are placed above that of the woman's in a way that is seen as normal and traditional. So it's important to realize that we all feed into this patriarchy when we don't see it for what it is, and it's really not something that people actively think about most of the time because we're just not taught to. Patriarchy makes it so that women have become objectified by men. Women are there for men's pleasure, as they see it. Men feel as if they are dominant and women are weak and inferior, here to nurture and support, not to think for themselves or stand up for themselves, because when they do, they're a nuisance or they're too bossy. In the 48 Things That Women Hear in a Lifetime That Men Just Don't, as well as Laura Bates' Everyday Sexism TED Talk video, women speak about the ways in which they've been controlled and objectified by both men and women. So Laura Bates talks about she's walking down the street and she hears a man say, "Look at the tits on that." Not her, but that. Patriarchy makes it so that women are dehumanized. In the 48 Things Women Hear in a Lifetime video, they start by showing young girls speaking of the ways in which they have been kind of oppressed and conditioned. And I think this is really moving and powerful because it shows how this conditioning literally starts at such a young age. We are taught to fit a certain role as women from the time we are born, and we become so accustomed to it that we essentially start feeding into our own oppression. I think what's so hard to understand about how much women are unequal to men is that so much of women's oppression is masked as actually being free now. Women exercise ownership over their bodies, and this surveillance of body control is sold as enablement, as empowerment. Women feel free to change their bodies to embrace their desires of how they want to look, and they end up engaging in this self-policing practice, and they're essentially at the scrutiny of themselves and other women. Men are not so outwardly thought of as being the reason for wanting to achieve a certain body type. This male gaze is completely invisible to them, and therefore they're not consciously aware of who they're truly doing this for. They wouldn't want to achieve this body type if it weren't for what they think that men really are looking for. So one really, really important things to remember, as described on the Daily Cost, is that patriarchy is generally not an explicit ongoing effort by men to dominate women. It's a long-standing system that we are born into and participate in, mostly unconsciously. So this is why feminism is so important, for making the unconscious conscious. It is clear to see why, as a society, both men and women need feminism. The main problem I think that feminism comes across and why it's not so widely accepted is the fact that no one seems to have agreed upon a definition of feminism. There are many men and women who see feminism as promoting the rights of women only, or see feminists as hating men, which again could not be further from the truth. Feminism at its core promotes equal rights for everyone. It is a movement to end sexist oppression and move towards a society that no longer focuses on patriarchy and promoting men, one to where women are no longer objectified and everyone's free to be themselves without judgment or punishment for not acting out their assigned gender roles. Bell Hooks talks about the aim of feminism as being not to benefit solely any specific group of women, any particular race or class. It doesn't privilege women over men. Feminism has the power to transform all of our lives, man, woman, black, or white, it does not matter. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, in her TED Talk about why we should all be feminists, brings to light some really important points. She says that in a literal way, men rule the world, and this made sense thousands of years ago because human beings lived in a world where physical strength was the most important attribute for survival. The physically stronger person was more likely to survive, to succeed, and thus to lead. And in general, men are physically stronger. Obviously, this is not the case across the board, but in general. So of course there are many exceptions, but today we live in a vastly different world. The person more likely to lead is not the physically stronger person. Now it's the more creative person, the more intelligent person, the more innovative person. And as she points out, there are no hormones for those attributes. A man is just as likely as a woman to be intelligent, creative, innovative. As human beings, we've evolved, but it seems that our ideas of gender have not evolved along with us. She says that gender as it functions today is a grave injustice, and I completely agree with that. She asks us to begin to dream and plan for a different world, and a world where we can embrace and be who we truly are. And the first step, she says in this, is raising our sons and our daughters differently. And so she speaks about something which I don't think is spoken about enough, and it's about the great disservice we do to boys. I think it's more outwardly obvious, the oppression that's done to women, but she talks about how we stifle the humanity of boys because we define masculinity in such a narrow way that we essentially put boys in this box and we teach them to be afraid of their true selves, of their weakness, of vulnerability, emotions. We teach them to essentially live in a mask. And then we wonder why boys are the way they are and why society is the way it is. We teach men to act in a way that is coined masculine, and then we teach women to act in a way which upholds their masculinity. So she just wants us to imagine how much happier we would be and how much freer we would be to our true selves if we didn't have the weight of these gender expectations on us all the time. Boys and girls are different biologically, but it's really the conditioning that exaggerates these differences, and then it essentially becomes a self-fulfilling process. So she just leaves us with, one day she decided to look up what a feminist is in the dictionary, and it said it's a person who believes in the social, political, and economic equality of the sexes. A feminist is a man or a woman who says, yes, there is a problem with gender as it is today, and we must fix it. We must do better. So this is essentially what feminism is, and this is why it is so important for us as a society to embrace feminism, to come to a place where everyone can embrace who they are and there's no judgment, there's no discrimination. And I think feminism is really going to be what makes the real change for both men and women in the long run and helps us move towards a more inclusive society.